All right, so welcome everyone. This is just going to be a brief rundown on modifying and editing your interface and a little bit of a look at my UI and how I've got mine laid out once I load it in here. So first things first, when you're customizing your UI inside of ZBrush, the first thing that you're going to want to do is keep in mind that this is a really personal thing and it's a really fluid thing. It's really easy to go in and adjust and edit kind of however you want for whatever purposes you want or whatever sort of way you want to use it. The first thing that you may want to take note of are the features that already exist in the interface that can be edited, such as the camera views here, which is part of the cam view feature here. Under preferences, this can be toggled on and off. I like to keep this on when I'm starting out a project, and I'll generally turn this off partway in because I often find myself clicking on it by accident. I definitely tend to work more to the right-hand side of the screen, so I tend to adjust this as I need to, but you can adjust that size as well, so it's a little bit more tight and out of the way, and all that sort of good stuff. Same thing in the top left corner, your thumbnail view is in the preferences as well, and you can adjust that. Again, at various stages in the project, I may toggle this on and off, excuse me, and adjust this as needed. Additionally, the big thing, the bread and butter for the UI setup is definitely going to be in the config menu. This is where you're going to find all of your toggles, all of your on and off settings. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is pop up here when you're editing your UI and adjust your config. Now, there's nothing directly to adjust here other than to toggle the enable customize on and off. But once you do this, you're going to start going into the edit mode for the interface. So all you need to do is once this is toggled on, it'll highlight in a bright orange. You can hold Control and Alt and click and drag these buttons in and out of the interface. So in my case, the first thing that I like to do is drag and drop that enable customize in. This was a tip that was shown to me years ago. I've always done it since, because it really allows you to be nice and organic with the way that you build your UI. I'm going to add in the store config option because we're going to need that. And I'm going to add in the load and save. So Control Alt and just drag and drop both of those in. And the idea here is a few things. First, the store config allows me to save the changes that I've made. So right off the bat, I'll hit store, and that's going to save and store that master config. The next thing that I'm going to do is enable and, well, adjust the enable and disable customize, right? So anytime I want to make a change, I can toggle this on, and it's right in the interface for me. So I don't need to go digging for it. I don't need to change anything or adjust anything. It's right there, ready for me to go. So I'm going to toggle that on and off as needed. The last, of course, two options are saving and loading. You technically don't need to save and load the UI once you've stored it. This is more for portability, or if you need a backup of your existing configuration, because it won't, it'll only store it locally here. But if when you click the store config, it'll be what shows up the next time you load ZBrush, or if not, it'll be part of the custom UI setup in the preferences. So if you go to your preferences, open up your config menu and go to restore custom UI, you'll get back whatever you had, or if you go to restore standard, it'll restore the default UI. I'll go and restore that again, and we can see those options pop back up in the top left or top right corner here. So what I'm going to do is save this if I want to kind of save the final result and have that something that's going to be portable for me, or something that I can move around from place to place easier. For now, what I'm going to do is enable this and start loading in and out the components that I do and don't need in my UI. So for example, for me personally, I don't really use the document controls here, the scroll, zoom, actual, and AA half. I actually could see an argument being made for leaving the actual option in here, but the hotkey is 0. And if you can remember that, you'll be okay. But this controls the way the document is laid out in the view space. And while there's definitely some exceptions as to when this might be useful, generally speaking, I don't utilize these options. So it's a good way for me to free up some space if I'm not utilizing these. The other way you can look at this, depending on your proficiency with the tools that are available and how comfortable you are in ZBrush already, is to take note that a lot of the existing UI is in the spacebar hotkey. So holding down spacebar gives you access to most of the things already in the UI. So instead of getting rid of stuff that doesn't sit in that window, you could start losing some of the different settings that you already have access to from that menu. But you have to kind of already be used to using that menu to really take advantage of it. So outside of that, I'm going to mute myself in the Twitch live stream chat because I don't think that makes sense. Okay, sorry, on Discord, not for you. So the other aspect of this that's going to be interesting is, like I said, dragging and dropping things out. So I'm going to hold Control Alt and I'm going to drag this into the document space, and that's going to get rid of that for me. So I can kind of just go in here and just drag these out to get rid of that and free that space up. Now, I may or may not use some of these other options. I don't want to make a lot of changes to this UI right now because I'm probably just going to load in my regular UI, but hopefully you kind of get the idea. Hold Control Alt and drag and drop whatever menu item you don't want. And this will include anything in the main window that's not the menus at the top. So I can take my alphas out of here, my texture out of here, my matte caps, my color block, my swatches, all this stuff. Control Alt, click and drag that out, and you don't need to see it anymore. Be aware that all of this stuff is in the menus, and it's not a bad idea to know where they are in the menus before you get rid of them, because obviously once they're gone, you're going to have to go digging to find them again. Now, one of the more popular things to add into the interface is definitely going to be brushes. It's not the way I always work, but it's definitely a good start point when you're just getting used to working inside of ZBrush and doing the whole, I guess, doing the whole digital sculpting thing and getting used to customizing your interface. Adding brushes is a great start point. Now, there's a little trick to adding brushes to the interface. So this works with every button, by the way, right? So anything that you are adding, it works the same way, but with brushes, it's a little bit more specific. So let's say, for example, I want to add my move brush, right? I use this brush all the time. The thing that you have to keep in mind is you can't grab it from the brush palette. You can't grab it from this large window here that pops up when you press B or when you click over here, right? You can't Control Alt and drag stuff from these windows. You can Control Alt and drag them from the brush menu if they're loaded in this palette here. So in order to load them, you have to select them first. First thing that I'm going to do is dock this. I'm going to left click on the little circle and dock it to the side palette here, or tray. And from the tray, I'll be able to Control Alt and drag. Now I know, clay buildup is definitely a brush I'm going to be using. I'm going to Control Alt and drag that down, and you'll see the bottom section, this bottom palette here, will give me a little bit of room to load these in. Standard brush, sure, I'll use that a fair bit. And then that move brush, right? Again, it's not in here, so I've got to select it first. And then once it's in here, I can Control Alt and drag and drop that down into there. That's really all there is to it. Control Alt and drag in or out of the interface, whatever tools you want. Another good example of tools that I might add would be things like the backface masking. I use backface masking all the time. You can drop it down with the brushes and have it sit there with the rest of the brushes that you're using, or you can even throw it in one of the other side palettes. You'll notice they will adjust to fit. So your windows will kind of shift over and the interface will kind of shrink down to create room for the existing buttons that you're adding, which in this case leaves me room for more buttons if I want, or you can take them back out and move them somewhere else and things will adjust to fit the new space. So a lot of what I'm doing when I'm editing my UI is all about, what am I using a lot? What do I need access to? What do I don't want to go digging for when I need it, right? Some of this stuff, it's okay to dig for sometimes, right? There's certain things that you're going to have a hard time replacing or putting the full tool set in an interface or in a space somewhere where you're comfortable. That's fine. For me, the main thing is my tool palette, right? The subtool menu in particular, you can't really reproduce this in the UI. You're going to be better off kind of leaving this here. And with that, some of the features of the subtool palette, I kind of just leave in here a lot of the time. Now, when you see my UI, you'll see some of this isn't the case, and I'm probably going to end up migrating some of that back over time. But again, this is a live document. This is a live space. I can adjust it and edit it to my needs as my needs evolve. So that's basically the idea. That's how we can edit our interface to do what we want it to do, to be what we want it to be. In addition to adjusting the UI itself, you also have hotkeys. I'm going to turn off the hotkeys. I'm going to just shrink that down so I can actually disable the customize and store the config. Oh, one last thing before I move on. Under preferences, under the UI, I guess the interface menu, yeah, UI, there's a button size option and a wide buttons option. Wide buttons is particularly useful for shrinking down those really large brush buttons and making them a little smaller. So if you want to squeeze more into a small space, you sacrifice the ability to read the brushes for a little bit more room for actual brush objects or buttons. And then the button size slider will allow you to kind of shrink down the interface as a whole, but it does require a restart to see that update. So I'm not going to turn that one on right now. Store the config after you make those preference changes as well, otherwise they will not lock in. And then additionally, you can set up hotkeys from here as well. You'll see the hotkeys menu here. Basically, with Enable Customize deactivated, Control-Alt works as a way to set hotkeys. So for example, if I hit Control-Alt, select my Move tool, and then hit, I don't know, M. I'm pretty sure M does something, so this is probably not the best thing to do. But Control-Alt, left-click, press M, and it's going to warn me that it's already assigned. That's pretty normal in this case. But I could make this Control M instead. Let's go Alt, Control, click Control M. Oh, Control M is also something. Okay, well, I'm just going to overwrite it at the risk of losing my hotkeys here. And then I have that. Now, if you're worried about this, definitely go into your preferences. And one thing that I notice here is, again, it works the same way, store, save, restore, but there isn't a default. So once you've stored, you're stuck with what you've got. I recommend saving out a default. So I'm going to restore it, save it, and label this default. And this is just a .txt file that'll save out, and I'll have that as a default file somewhere that I can go back to if I make a mistake or if I break something significant. In this case, I'll do this again, Control Alt, Control M. Okay, now when I grab my regular brush, I hit Control M and I get my move brush, right? So now that's working on my model the way I'd expect it to. So lastly here, the hotkeys can also be applied to another interface component, which is the menus, right? So you can do this on existing menus or with custom menus. The way I typically do this is to go up to the menu that I want to activate the hotkey on, Control Alt, hit the hotkey, right? So we'll go Control Alt and stroke, and Control S maybe for stroke, click OK. And now I get the stroke menu at my cursor when I press it. So this can be really convenient for menus that you find yourself using a lot that aren't, I mean, some of them are really, really big, so it's a little difficult, but there's definitely some options there. Plus, if you want to build your own custom menus for certain tasks. So let's take a quick look at how we would build a custom menu. To build a custom menu, it's pretty straightforward. You go into your, let me see if I can remember this, custom UI, and then there's a create new menu option, which is grayed out right now for some reason. Why would it be grayed out? New menu. Why is it grayed out? I'm going to initialize ZBrush. Yes, that's fine. Let's see if we can kind of get this back to default. Why won't my new menu item show up? Let's just reload my file. Yeah, I can't seem to create a new menu item. I'm not quite sure why. I'm just going to restore the default hotkeys, and I don't think there's anything weird about anything that I've done, so I'm not quite sure why I can't create a custom menu right now. But normally what you do is select this, and then it would give you the option to name the menu. You name it, and it'll show up in the top. I can actually show you an example of this, barring the fact that, of course, that I can't create one myself, but let's go in and load one of my existing UIs. So I'll just go into config, go load UI, and just browse over to one of my pre-built UIs. And I'll go custom UI, let's go custom UI 2020. Open that one up. So this is my custom UI, and you can see I actually have a modeling menu created here that actually has a bunch of my brushes. Now, there's a bunch of empty space in here because there's a bunch of brushes that I don't have stored on this PC yet. So once I migrate those over, and put them in the correct folders, they'll show up here. But custom brushes aside, I've built a series of small menus inside this. This is done the same way. So going into the modeling menu, I can dock that. And with it docked, I can very easily turn on the Enable Customize, which I have down at the bottom of my UI, open up my brush palette, and take any of these brushes and Control-Alt-Drag them into the menu. I'm using subpalettes for this, so I've gone into my Preferences menu, Custom UI, and there you go. You can see the Create New Menu item is now available for some reason. And I can Control-Alt and drag custom palettes into the menu, and I can create my own custom menus. So now I've got a new custom option here. Just I can drag in whatever other brushes I want. So I'll throw the Form Soft brush into there. And when I open that up, there's the Form Soft brush. So I can kind of add in, whatever brushes I'd like, and I can do it multiple times, right? So there's all my brushes in there. I can minimize that. I can open it back up, and I can rename with Control, Alt, and left click on the menu, and then I'll just go in and do a form brush. So now I've got that named. I can minimize it, I can maximize it, and these larger categories are the exact same thing. So I've kind of just nested these subpalettes in, and I can get rid of this the same. If I go clear the title and then hit enter, it should, oops, why didn't that work? Should be able to clear the title and then hit enter, and it should delete the menu, but it doesn't look like it wants to. So that's always fun. Do I need the Enable Customize for that? Okay, it doesn't want to work, but that's okay. I saved this, so I'll just go back through into my preferences and just reload the UI again. And this is actually, I don't even need to do, no, I do need to do that because I don't have the shortcut there. So I'll just go into the config and just restore the custom UI. Oh, actually, that was not the stored one, so I have to load it again, sorry. Preferences, getting a little ahead of myself here. So we'll go back into the custom, or the config menu, load the UI back in, open that up. You'll also notice I've got some custom colors here inside of ZBrush. Nothing really crazy going on with this one. I'm just using this as a base for, or I'm just adjusting this as more to my own preference. But again, this is done from the preferences menu. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here, although I recommend being cautious about turning on some of these options. There's one in particular under, under one of these. I don't know if it's auto collapse or subpalette. Yeah, I think it's one of these that can kind of do some weird stuff when you toggle it on. I always forget which one, and then when I turn it on, it makes a mess out of your whole UI, and then things have to be restored and stuff like that. So just be cautious about making changes, especially if you don't have quick access to the restore option. I'll store this config for now. So I have that stored, and then, yeah. Now, as a final little note, this is the basic setup for my UI. I'm going to be essentially just briefly explaining how I've set this up. I've got my tool palette on the left instead of the right, mostly because my reliance on the spacebar key for a lot of my my basic controls like draw size and focal shift kind of get offset a little bit and displaced if I have a menu on the right-hand side. Or if I don't have enough space on the left-hand side for that menu to pop up. So it's actually okay if I use up more of the right-hand space, but by filling in more of the left-hand space, I actually keep my cursor over the draw size a little bit more. So I've kind of buffered this on purpose so that when I hit that spacebar key, my draw size is right under my cursor, which is usually what I'm using the spacebar key for. But of course, I still have access to a lot of those features. The rest of the UI is built around tools that I either want to have access to in the UI or are a way for me to quickly access things. So I don't have brushes in here. I've got those hotkeyed for the most part anyway. You will see some clip and trim and masking brushes at the bottom. But if I go to preferences and I go into my hotkeys and load my hotkeys up, which one is it? This one looks like the newest one. So I'll open that one and hope that that's the right one. Pressing A brings up my brush palette, right? So I've got that modeling brush menu here for me to access. And I can use that to access my brushes when I need to, or of course I can use B to bring up the brush palette. And I've got my alpha control here because I like to swap my alphas more often and make adjustments to my alphas. I'm actually still looking for or thinking of a way to incorporate the alpha adjust option, which I'm using more and more these days. Let me see if I can actually drag and drop that in without making a mess of this. No, I cannot, which is unfortunate. It's like one of the few things in the UI that you can't really seem to migrate properly. But that is one of the things that I use a fair bit that I can't access from here. But even just having access to some default alphas is nice. And then I've got my brush depth settings. A lot of this stuff is more about tools that I want to have access to because I want to use them more. So some things I've added just so that I've got quicker access to it and I think about using it more often than not. Some subtool control, delete, append, extract, and all that sort of stuff up here. Some mirror, and weld. I've got some masking and clipping and trimming brushes, as well as some of the controls for the stroke menu down here at the bottom. And then lastly, I've got some quick selection for materials, quickly adjusting lighting and stuff like that, so that I can make these changes while I'm looking at the model really quickly without having to think about it. So that's kind of my thought process with this, but I still generally recommend, start out with brushes in your UI and just kind of speed that workflow up a bit until you get a feel for what you're using on a regular basis and what you need. But anyway, that's the UI setup and customization inside of ZBrush in a nutshell. I'll be saving this out on Zoom and sharing this out with everyone on my Discord and letting you know where you can get that as soon as it's available, just so that you have another little resource, another little video to refer back to on that. So I'll stop that recording.